Hey, so today I'm going to show you how to paint and draw a portrait from the profile view with watercolors and color pencils. And I've prepared the setup already, so this is our reference picture here. And this is the transferred reference picture on Fabriano paper. For portraits, I prefer the Fabriano paper because I can draw on it. It is hot pressed satin, grana satina or satana, I believe. And the difference between cold press or other watercolor paper is that the surface is very smooth. It's not as smooth, for example, like normal drawing paper, but it's enough to make decent drawings on it. And it also holds the color pencils and it doesn't get hurt. Whereas with other cold press watercolor paper, you often have the problem that it can only take so much drawing. So I'm going to start with a base skin tone. The model that we have here has a kind of toned or tanned skin color, which I find very beautiful and which fits to the motif. I decided to make an Egyptian themed goddess portrait. Okay, you don't see the rest, but when I finish the drawing you will see what I mean. However, in today's tutorial I'm only focusing on the facial part and on this area, and the rest I will record in another time-lapse video. So I'm just filling out the complete area here. And I will not add a lot of shadows with watercolors. I want to have a very accurate and almost perfect portrait. You can personally decide how much perfection and how much looseness and roughness you want to implement in your own portrait drawings. With watercolors you can pretty much start with completely impressionist and loose and rough portraits to almost perfect. It's not like oils. With oils you can make photorealistic paintings, but with watercolors you can get very, very close to it. So this is why I really like watercolors so much. I want to add the lip color here. This brownish red tone, and I'm using burnt sienna, and I'm mixing it with cadmium red deep, I think. It's just a red tone, just a regular red tone, but it's a cadmium tone, so it's whether cadmium red deep or cadmium red, just regular cadmium red. So I'm going to fill in the lip color now. And I choose a red that is slightly brighter than on the reference, because you can always go more muted with watercolors, but not the other way around. So in the case you mixed a color that is too dark or too grayish, you almost get no chance to make it more bright or more saturated, even with color pencils. So it's better to just choose colors that might be a little too bright, and later on you can still mute them and make them a little bit more grayish. So for the white of the eye I choose indigo blue, just a very light version of it with a lot of water. White of the eye is never white, as you have probably already noticed, and because I say it in, I don't know, every video probably. And now I'm going to add the eyebrow color, and for that I used indigo blue and olive green with a lot of water. in the beginning it's always a good idea to just build up the colors and using as less pigment as possible, because you can always get darker, but not the other way around. So I just want to prepare the underpainting for my color pencil work. So I will cover the complete area probably with color pencils, and I just want to lay down the base for the drawing so that there's nothing white coming through the color pencils, because I want to have a very deep and realistic outcoming. I will now add the shadow around her chin, and for that I'm using light ochre, burnt sienna and olive green. Olive green is perfect for any skin tones, and I really I can highly recommend this color. So since this is Fabriano paper, the blendings, so I won't be able to get any decent blendings here, so I will just live with some watercolor edges. I will try to keep them very subtle though. It's always a little bit of luck involved when you paint with watercolor, so we will see. So I'm adding just a bit of olive green here and a bit of light ochre, like that. And for her nose shadow, I'm using also burnt sienna, olive green and a bit of indigo. I just use the paint that I already have on my palette. The further you progress with your painting, you will notice that your palette will get a lot of paint on it, and you don't have to mix that much, especially for gray or midtones, only if you need some bright tones. So I'm pretty much only mixing in the beginning of the painting process, and then afterwards I just take something that's on my palette without thinking. So I just look, for example, here we have gray, and then I can just use the gray on my palette. So now I want to add this nostril color here. For this color I don't have mixed something yet, so I'm using just ivory black and burnt sienna to get a nice dark tone, which is also a bit like red, because every shadow on skin has always some color to it, whether it's being red or green or blue. It's always different because you have the blood that flows through the skin, and yeah, there will always be shining some reds through it. So this nostril is a bit out of place, but I will have to correct it later. And I will now use the same color to add the shadow here around her lip. And then I will add a bit more of the indigo blue to it and go over her lashes like that. And I think there's a bit of olive green as well on the reference, so I'm mixing a bit of this green tone into the dark color here too. So I'm just carefully following the lines here. I don't want to add too much of the dark tone here. And now the eyebrows also have olive green in them. I will use olive green, burnt sienna again, and indigo. I think these are my 3 colors that I use for mixing shadows on skin tones, because every like a mix of all of them fits to every skin tone, whether needed to be a bit more greenish or brownish. You can mix a lot of colors out of them. Okay, now I would like to add a bit more orange to the face. Here we can see a lot of this cheek color, and there's a little bit more saturation on her nose. So I would like to add that too, like that. And I will just go over this complete area here. I try to blend it in by using a wet brush and following the edges of this area. And I think I will need to use a larger brush here because it already made an edge which I didn't want, and I will just enhance this area and just make it bigger. And I need to work a bit quick here because it can dry very fast, and then you have an edge and then you can't do anything about it anymore. Especially on Fabriano paper, you won't have this phenomenon on different papers because they all behave differently, and it might be that on your paper you don't have any edges at all, or just only a few. On everything else I play with edges. Only with faces I want to keep them realistically. So now where this whole area is wet, I can add some cheek tones here. So I'm using cadmium red again and a bit of magenta, but very, very light. I don't want to overdo it here. And I'm touching carefully the surface. This is already very strong, so I'm using a wet brush again, and I'm just spreading it out here. Spreading it out, it looks very nice already, so I'm happy with that. Here at the bottom I would like to add some green, so I'm using olive green, but only a tiny bit, and some light ochre. And then I'm just doing the same here, and I'm just adding this area here. Here you have this area, and I just mimic it on the right side. I know, oh my god, this happens so often. I'm now using the wet brush, and I just go over this area because I want to add this light area here, so I just want to lift off a bit of the paint again. And now where I worked on this area, I see that here on her forehead we need more of a darker tone. So I'm just using again light ochre, a bit of the cadmium red, and I go over her forehead here. It's a bit too rosy, so I add just more of the ochre tone. And then, very important, a wet brush only, without any paint in it, and just carefully blending it here into the rest of her skin tone. So when I squint the eyes, obviously my painting is way too light, and I haven't worked on the eye area here and also on the nose area. But first I think I will add the shadow here because I totally forgot that. So just the olive green mix olive green, burnt sienna and ochre mix. The best mix for skin tones, probably. Yeah, so I want to add more of the grayish tones, and for that I'm using indigo blue and olive green, and just a light version of them. So I'm adding a lot of water to it, and I think, yeah, this is still wet, but I think this could be useful because the paint might spread a bit, might bleed a bit. So I will carefully try to get this shadow here. Very carefully. And there's also a bit of orange here and like a purple gray tone. So I'm just using cadmium red light here, and there's also a bit indigo blue on the palette, so this should be okay for the color. And I just continue here on the edges of the area I just added. Then I use a wet brush and then I blend it in like that. So I need to blend the whole area here. I need to wet the whole area here, because otherwise we get edges again. Okay, now like here we need a grayish tone. There are greens in it, oranges, browns and blues. And so I will just randomly add some paint from my palette that resembles this gray tone, maybe a bit more indigo here. And just add it to this area. And I go over the eyelid shadow here again because it faded a bit. It's normal when the color dries that it's that the color also fades a bit, not too much but a bit. So I use my wet brush here and blend everything out. The whole area around her eye is still way too light. Like the whole portrait is way too light, but we can only do one thing after another or at a time. So let's start with the eye portion here. And I'm just using this brownish tone that I have on my palette, all paints just mixed together. And I'm going around the eye. I would also like to add some magenta here, because like here there's a little rosy tone, and we don't want to miss any skin tones, right? So I'm just using a wet brush and I follow this area here and blend it out. Otherwise I get these edges that I don't want. So here I need to get a bit darker, and I'm using burnt sienna and indigo blue, and it can just bleed into the paper here. And I need to blend it out a bit. And for the finer details, of course, I will have to use color pencils. This shadow here is way too light, so I will wet the entire area so that I can work on this shadow. With Fabriano paper, when you add water, nothing happens. With other brands, with other paper, I think the only exception is Arc paper or Arches paper, but with other paper, the paint of the first layers will be reactivated again, and you will lift it off. So this can be especially annoying when you want to work in layers, like I do right now. So depending on what how your painting process will be, different papers can be useful. So maybe you don't want to work in layers, maybe you just want to add 1 or 2 layers and that's it. Then you can use most watercolor papers. The other paper that I like is Hahnemühle Britannia. There you can work in layers, but you can also lift off paint again. So it's balanced out. It's not like you would lift off like every paint or every color, but only a little bit. However, this is cold pressed paper and the surface is rather textured, so I can't really draw on it. And for portraits that I want to draw, I really prefer the Fabriano paper. So now I tone this area here and make it a bit darker. I think that looks better. It can dry now, and I will continue with her lashes. And I need a very small brush for that. For the lashes, I just use ivory black, and I just look how the lashes look on the left side on my reference, and I just try to mimic that. Also, obviously for the smaller details you will need a smaller brush, and I always lose my small brushes. I don't know why, but they are either lying on the floor or they are under the pillows on the couch, like on the weirdest places. And every time when I search my brushes for a tutorial, I have to stop and first find the small brush. So it's really weird. So to blend in the lashes into the surrounding area, I use black and burnt sienna and follow the edges. So I go around the edges and make a blending between the harsh darkness of the black and the gray of the surrounding area. And we want to have smooth edges. We don't want to have like those sharp edges here, because it looks like pasted instead of a realistic eye. And now I'm using Van Dyke Brown for her eyebrows. Since I switched from little watercolor boxes to watercolor tubes, I saved so much money. So whenever my little watercolor, it's called pan, I believe, is empty, I just refill it with the tube. I didn't know it. So if you don't know that, it's really worth the price. And I only buy tubes now. With the eyebrows as well, they have to blend into the skin, and there's always a bit green around them, so it never hurts to add some green eyebrows here as well. It might sound weird, but these are the realistic colors that everyone has in their skin. No matter what skin color you have, there will always be some greens in it. And here as well around the shadow on her eyelid. There's a bit of green, and I will try to blend it into the surrounding. And now let's finally go to the shadow under her nose. And here it's a bit more brown, but there's also green in it. It doesn't really matter as long as the color value is right. Like that. So now it looks really weird. I think I need to correct here some areas with my color pencils so that it doesn't look that weird. But first I will add the shadows here. And for that I'm just using red, some red tone and burnt sienna. A little bit more of the red tone. Cadmium red is a good one here. And I'm carefully filling in the shadows here, like this. And on the bottom side too. Okay, now I will let everything dry and I will come back with my color pencils. So the paint has completely dried, which is very important for adding color pencils. Otherwise, the paper will get damaged and you can pretty much mess up your drawing. So I want to first correct the nose, and for that I'm using Polychromos Caput Mortuum Violet. This is a nice dark brown tone which with a violet tone to it. And I will add her nostril here very carefully. I don't want to make the nostril too big. This would be very ugly. And I also need to give the nose a different contour because I feel I made it a bit too round and I would like to change that. And for that I use raw umber, which is a greenish brown. And I only use very light pressure. This is important, especially in the beginning. Later on, when I have laid down a lot of pigment onto the paper, I need to use more pressure. But at first, light pressure. I have to use light pressure. So, like the nose tip here is more pointed than on my drawing. So what I will do, I want to correct it a bit. Let's see if this works. This is Caran d'Ache White Luminance, and I will just try to go a bit over the tip here to cover that, and just very carefully change the form. So okay, I think this doesn't work. So I will just have to add to the nose tip. This is Venetian red. Needs to be very, very sharp for such small portraits. So I will make a new contour here. Like that. And now I am adding these slight color variations here. So we have a shadow here, and I will very carefully paint in these shadows here, or draw in these shadows here. I use, as I already mentioned, very light pressure, and I'm constantly comparing it with the reference photo here. So, and here for the bottom shadow, I use raw umber again, like that. And I want to carefully work in this shadow in the upper part of the nose, like that. And now I'm using from Luminance Sienna Brûlée 10%. So here's burnt sienna as a pigment in this wax pencil, but only with a 10% concentration. So this is what you get. It's like violet, a gray violet tone. And I think I can use this tone to blend the shadow in. Maybe it's a bit too dark. I use it for the area under her nostril. So here you have a light area, and here's a gray area, and I think I will use it for this gray area there. And you might have already noticed it's very detail. It's like detail work, so it takes a lot of time, but it's super rewarding. But I think let me get the pencil here from the floor. Every time you want to make something more realistic or even completely photorealistic, it takes a lot of time. So there's no kind of shortcut to it. But I find it relaxing. So getting those small details, I personally find super relaxing. I enjoy it. I think in the tutorials it is a bit it's a bit slower than I would do it, because I have to explain it. So you will probably get it done a bit faster than I'm doing it. I'm also going over her what's it called? The border of her nose here, and just blend in the color pencils. The Luminance pencils allow me to get rid of the texture, because it adds a layer of wax on top of my color pencils, which is wonderful. It's the only way to get a very smooth surface. Now we need this line here. So I use some of the brown tones that I have. Burnt sienna from Polychromos. I need to get it sharp, obviously. And I'm just carefully adding some of the pigments to the paper. Using the white luminance again. And I will make this area here a bit lighter. And here the tip needs to be a bit lighter as well. The more accurate you work in the beginning, the better the portrait gets in the end. Sometimes I want to save time and then I rush, but every mistake I do in the beginning adds up in the end and can't really undone. So the watercolor is permanent, the color pencils are permanent, you can't erase them completely. So everything you have to do is just be very careful and compare it with your reference. Now I have here dark cadmium orange, and I will add some of it to her nose to get more life into her skin. Also the nostril is not completely right here. I'm using burnt sienna. I just want to have the shape of the nostril right here. I think this is okay. Maybe a bit of the luminance color here at the bottom. I think that's okay. And now I will go to her eye.